If I take it from one perspective, my arm was twisted. I had a person in my community who knew about the program where I graduated from, and she kept pushing me, and finally the opportunity happened. And so lo and behold, 6 years later, I have a degree in adult education. However, um, I've always been interested in teaching and learning, and I've always tended to focus in on older students, senior adults, all that type of stuff. So I was kind of doing it before I learned the terminology. Yeah. Don't be afraid to make your own mark. Find out what you want to do, focus in on something, and then splash that water and make all sorts of whatever. Just get your name out there and promote yourself. Andragogy is the background of adult education, which is the study of or how adults learn and all that good stuff. The basis of learning and education is still in pedagogy. Adult education takes pedagogy and says, hey, this person already has the ability to be self-aware, to self-monitor, to self-advise, self-direct, etc. So let's use learning and education and then tap into their ability to learn, to seek out education. Whereas those who are not adults don't always need to, or don't always know what they need to know. Whereas adults often know what they need to know or what they think they need to know. And so that's kind of the dividing line between young and old, or kids and adults. Apply it everywhere. My philosophy of teaching and even living is that if you're not learning, you're not living. So learn and grow in everything. Whether we consciously take the choice or consciously be aware of it, we're always learning something. For example, I've seen you now for the last 3 days. Okay? Uh, Intelligent, smart, so I've learned that about you. But if I don't stop long enough and go, hey, what have I learned about bread? Then I'm not going to know that. I've also noticed that when you're thinking, you tend to do certain things. So yeah, I'm picking on you, but you're right here. You're an example. So that's to me, learning's in everything, and being an adult educator is capturing that. Prime example: I did a concurrent session this morning. It was on developing a personal or business digital portfolio. Had the slides, had the information. I was giving it to them. Questions started popping up, and I could tell immediately that people in the room needed to know something else other than just what the topic was. And so I went with it. And yes, I linked it back into the subject of the thing, but I was willing to go and say, okay, they have questions that are related to this. So let's capture on that. Let's take it where they need to know. And when I did that, everything else, the questions just started coming out and there was more interaction. So that's learning, that's living. If you study the field of adult education, you learn the names: Lindemann, Knowles, Cunningham, Hinsky, etc. And it's being aware that there are specific traits for adults in learning. And so that needs to be captured. And that's also something that has, if you look at the history of corporations or businesses, a lot of times it was, hi, here's something, go do it. Well, how do you do that? Especially when in our world, we're constantly changing in technology. So how do you help somebody do that? And that's really the importance and the drive behind adult education, I think. I would say the perceptions and the misunderstandings that are out there about adult education are because people have limited adult education. For example, if you go tell someone that you are an adult educator, they may automatically think GED. Okay, yes, that is part of adult education, but so is the corporate trainer. So is the Sunday school teacher. So is, anyone who's working with adults who's helping them gain knowledge or skills. So that's really the misconceptions that are out there. It's just a lack of understanding and knowledge. Yes, we have the big names, Lindemann, Hinchke, Knowles, etc. And that type of understanding of adult ed is, in my opinion, directly linked to educational theories, which don't change just because of the age group. We still learn, there's still cognitive dissonance, there's still the mental things that's happening, there's still the linking and being able to see and put things together. So the basics of education and learning don't change just because of how old a person is. I question or wonder, might be no, even question. No, I'll stay with question. I question the social action element that seems to have a major flow in adult education within the U.S. And not just within the U.S. The name pops up, Freire. Okay, yes, he was right. You can't teach adults to learn if they're worried about other things. And if you teach them this, and that's going to change their life, and so you have to deal with that. So I understand all that, but sometimes I wonder if people have used that just to get on their own personal soapbox. And I have some friends who are included in that group. They're intelligent, they're smart, they have made contributions to the field, they have brought awareness to certain things, but I still go back to the basic of, is it really education and learning that they're talking about? Or are they talking about a social element or somebody's agenda? And so that's where I start struggling with what's in the field. I would say anything and everything you can find. Again, it goes back to the learning and living concept. Draw anything and everything you can, assess it for what it is, assess it how it applies to you and your situation, assess it how it applies to you personally. And take what you can, store the rest, and who knows, you may need to pull it up later in life. I'm concerned about the field, very concerned about the field, to be honest. I am an amateur historian, if you will, and I've looked at what has happened over the last 100+ years, how the field has developed, where things are going, and some parts of me want to blame the famous names that have come out in adult education for not professionalizing the field. They made their mark, they made their splash in the education pool, they brought whatever they did to the knowledge base and the skill base, but there's nothing that perpetuates adult education. And you can see that by looking at what has happened within higher education. More specifically, when I started having my arm twist to consider working on my adult ed degree, the program where I attended was consistently first or second in the nation. When I started my program in 2006, again, it was first or second within the nation. By the time I finished 5 years later, 5.5 years later in 2011, it maybe made a blip on the map, on somebody's map. Couple reasons. First, a couple of the names that have made their mark in adult education retired, justifiably so. A couple of them moved on to other positions in administration within higher ed, and so they weren't necessarily in the public arena. There's the tension between HROD and adult education that's out there. I am aware personally, and I have been involved with, 2 different organizations that have talked about setting adult education standards for programs, which is a step towards professionalization, but neither one of them have actually gone through the process and carried it through. And there's varying reasons. One of them, the ball got dropped when somebody moved on and took another volunteer position in someplace else. You know, the person just couldn't stay in that organization with that position because they had other responsibilities. The other group that I'm aware of bring it up and talk about it every couple of years, but there seems to be a large discussion about what is and shouldn't be considered. And when I sit back and look at that and look at what I see in higher education and what I see within the professoriate, it boils down to the stereotypical modality, the stereotypical whatever you want to call it, that happens within faculties. And so it really has hurt the field. The program that I graduated from is nowhere even close to what it was when I started the program. A few friends that graduated after me kept in touch. We kept in touch. We talked about things. And I just watched that program deteriorate. I'm aware of several schools that had adult education in a program. It was labeled as such. It may have been tied with higher education, but adult education words or adult learning was part of the program name. Those have been either sunset or they were absorbed into something else. If you look at what some of the programs has popped up in the last 5 to 10 years, you get things such as professional studies, which may be the new name of adult education. But I'm the person who says if it's a duck, they call it a duck, you know, so that's something. Some people have said it's more about workforce studies, which focuses a little bit differently. So, all right, wrapping that up and not preaching for the next 20 minutes, there needs to be a standard set. There needs to be not necessarily a new organization, but the organizations that do exist may really need to step up and say, okay, we're going to professionalize the field. And this is what it means. And you can go back and look at all that. You know, look at the law field, look at the medical field, look at etc. There's a huge difference. And those fields have standards, they have a definite path. There is review to make sure things stay current. There is organizations that actually push the liveliness of the field. I don't see that in adult ed. A couple things. Well, my publication or my dissertation research was about asynchronous learning, and more specifically about credit hours and how you assign credit hours to online learning. Long story short, credit hours is actually defined and based on time, seat time. Even with what happened in 2010 with the big Higher Education Act brouhaha and I think it was called the Programs Integrity Act or something similar to that. It defined the credit hour as the learning that takes place within the equivalent of 1 hour of instruction plus 2 hours of learning. So for every credit hour, there's supposed to be a minimum of 3 hours of learning. How do you track that? No one has come up with how to track that. So that was the big or the big push from my research. I have taken that a little bit and have played with looking at objectives and seeing if there's some sort of measurable correlation or connection with credit hours. Unfortunately, my research there was very limited just because of the timing and graduating and work and all that good stuff changed. But that's something that I would like to continue to investigating. I have found, though, that schools are now hiding, if you will, or protecting their syllabi by putting that information behind password protected space, which is understandable. So that really limits what I can do research-wise as far as just open. I've published out of my doctoral research at least 3 and I think 4 publications, and for me that was taking what ended up being a massive amount of data that actually required me to extend the typical dissertation into one more chapter, and I just broke it out and wrote it. So, four publications. For me, I don't mind publishing, but I find that it's almost laborious because I don't necessarily think and write the way you're supposed to publish in academics. And so for me, it was always getting stuff down on paper and then having to go back and try and work up a translation. So that's my struggle, and I know it. Maybe I'll find a coach one day who can help me figure out something like that. But if that happens, it works great. Something that I'm kind of doing on the side, which relates to what I do as a consulting business, is looking at how people can use technology. And I'm focused in on adults. For example, my session this morning was on developing a digital portfolio. And I don't just get up there and talk about things. I go out and I look and read and I find information, and then I try to intelligently say, hey, this is what you need to be aware of. And so I'm still doing that type of research. Who knows? Maybe I'll turn all of those into publications yet. We'll see. No, but I would encourage anyone who's seeking out a degree in adult ed or related to adult ed. Again, take everything you can find, take everything that you learn, store the rest if you don't learn it. You'll find out that you'll need it someday. And just keep connecting the dots.